USS Arkansas, or BB-33, was a dreadnought battleship, and, technically the second member of the Wyoming class, but that's wrong. Even though the class is named after her sister Wyoming, once again, these birth dates are, well, actually, quite simple, no matter how you slice it. Arkansas is the older sister in this case. She was laid down first, launched first, and commissioned first. Except the class is named after her little sister. So, but in any event, these were still rather early dreadnought-style battleships. Arkansas, in particular, was 562 feet long, with a beam of 93 feet 3 inches and a draft of 28 feet 6 inches. She would displace 26,417 tons as designed, and up to 27,680 tons at full load. She was powered by 4-shaft Parsons steam turbines and 12 coal-fired Babcock and Wilcox water tube boilers that were rated for 28,000 shaft horsepower, pushing her to a top speed of 20.5 knots. Her cruising range was 8,000 nautical miles at a speed of 10 knots. She was armed with a main battery of 12 12-inch Mark 7 guns in 6 twin Mark 9 gun turrets on the centerline, 2 of which were placed in a super-firing pair. The other 4 were placed aft of the superstructure in 2 super-firing pairs. Her secondary battery consisted of 21 5-inch guns mounted in casemates along the side of her hull. Her main armor belt was 11 inches thick, while the gun turrets had 12-inch thick faces. Her conning tower had 11.5-inch thick sides. Arkansas was laid down on January 25, 1910 at New York Shipbuilding in Camden, New Jersey. She be launched January 14, 1911, and she was commissioned on September 17th of 1912 at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, under the command of Captain Roy C. Smith. She participated in a fleet review on October 14, 1912 for President William Howard Taft. She would actually take Taft aboard that same day for a trip down to Panama to inspect the, Panama Canal, which was still under construction at the time. After delivering Taft to the canal zone, she began her shakedown cruise, and during that time, the Navy's first long-distance continuous wave wireless telegraphy system was successfully tested, with regular transmissions received by Arkansas from a prototype Polson Arc transmission facility that was located in Arlington, Virginia. This was a big deal at the time, and would push Navy communication systems into a much more modern age. On December 26, she'd return to the Canal Zone to pick up Taft again and take him to Key West, Florida. She was then assigned to the Atlantic Fleet and participated in fleet maneuvers off the east coast of the United States. Her first overseas cruise was to the Mediterranean, which she set out on in late October of 1913. She'd stop in several ports during this trip, including Naples, Italy, on November 11th, where she would actually celebrate the birthday of King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy. In early 1914, an international incident with Mexico would culminate in the American occupation of Veracruz. Arkansas did participate in this occupation and contribute 4 companies of naval infantry, which amounted to 17 officers and 313 enlisted men. American forces had to fight their way through the city until they secured it, and 2 of Arkansas's crewmen were actually killed during this. Another 2, John Grady and Jonas H. Ingram, would be rewarded the Medal of Honor during the occupation. Her detachment would return on April 30th, and she'd remain in Mexican waters until September 30th when she left to return to the U.S. She arrived in Hampton Roads, Virginia on October 7th to take part in some naval exercises. She then headed for the New York Navy Yard for some maintenance. After repairs, she steamed back down to the Virginia Capes for more training maneuvers. Then she returned to the New York Navy Yard again on December 12th for even more maintenance. Repairs were completed within a month, and on January 16, 1915, she headed back to the Virginia Capes for further exercises. After that, she would head down to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for more exercises. She's doing a lot of exercising, is what I'm trying to explain to you. And then she headed back for more training off Hampton Roads on April 7th, followed by another maintenance period at the New York Navy Yard, starting on April 23rd. On June 25th, after repairs were completed again, she headed for Newport, Rhode Island for torpedo practice, as well as tactical maneuvers, which lasted through late August. By August 27th, she was back in Hampton Roads, where she was doing even more exercises. And this cycle of exercises would pretty much continue until the beginning of World War I for the United States. The U.S. declared war on Germany on April 6, 1917, and Arkansas was at the time assigned to Battleship Division 7 that was stationed in Virginia. At first, she patrolled the East Coast and trained gun crews, and that lasted for 14 months. But after that, she was sent over the Atlantic to Britain in July of 1918 to relieve USS Delaware, her cousin. And while approaching the Royal Navy base in Rosyth, she actually fired upon what she thought was a periscope from a German U-boat. The destroyers that were with her also dropped death charges, but no hits were affected on this apparent submarine. It's still not clear if there ever was one at all. Arkansas would arrive in Rosyth on July 28th and join Battleship Division 9. And for the remainder of World War I, the division would operate as the 6th Battle Squadron of the Grand Fleet. But not much was going on naval-wise at that point in World War I, so Arkansas, beyond possibly seeing a U-boat and shooting at it, didn't really do much of anything. On November 11th, the armistice would go into effect, and the terms of that required Germany to intern a significant portion of the High Seas Fleet in Scapa Flow. Arkansas and a few other American warships participated in the internment and escorted multiple German vessels into Scapa Flow. On December 1st, Battleship Division 9 would be detached from the Grand Fleet, after which Arkansas departed the Firth of Forth for the Isle of Portland. She then went to sea to meet up with the ocean liner George Washington, which was carrying President Wilson to Europe. She would assist in escorting that ship into Brest, France on December 13th, and after that, she headed back to New York City, arriving on December 26th, where she participated in a naval review for the Secretary of the Navy, Josephus Daniels. And now we enter the interwar period, where you don't expect much to be going on, but interestingly, Arkansas was remarkably busy during this time. A lot of her time was caught up in doing regular training exercises, which is obvious enough, but there were actually quite a few notable events during the next 20 or so years. After she returned to the US, she actually went into dry dock at Norfolk for an extensive overhaul, after which she'd rejoin the fleet for training exercises off of Cuba, and then crossed the Atlantic again, bound for Europe. She reached Plymouth on May 12, 1919, and then took weather observations on May 19th, after which she would serve as a reference vessel to guide the Navy Curtiss NC flying boats that were flying from Trepassey Bay, Newfoundland, to Europe. After she completed this particular task, she steamed to Brest on June 10th and picked up Admiral William S. Benson, who was the chief of naval operations at the time, as well as his wife, and she carried them both back to New York. On July 19th, Arkansas would depart Hampton Roads to join her new assignments over in the Pacific. She headed for San Francisco, arriving on September 6th via the Panama Canal, where she took aboard both Secretary Daniels and his wife. She took them to Blakely Harbor, Washington on September 12th, and then the following day participated in a naval review for President Wilson. On September 19th, she entered Puget Sound Navy Yard for a general overhaul, and she'd be returned to the fleet in May of 1920 for training operations off of California. It's probably worth mentioning that when Arkansas was built, the Hall classification system wasn't actually in place for the Navy. So on July 17th, that's when she was given her designation, BB-33. She then headed to Hawaii in September for her first visit to the islands, and in early 1921, she'd actually visit Chile, where she'd be received by President Arturo Alessandri Palma, and her crew would man the rail to honor the Chilean president. In August of 1921, she actually returned to the Atlantic to become the flagship of the Commander Battleship Force Atlantic Fleet. Throughout the 1920s, she would carry midshipmen from the United States Naval Academy on summer cruises. She went on a tour of Europe in 1923, and she stopped in Copenhagen on July 2nd, where she was visited by King Christian X of Denmark. She also stopped off in Lisbon and Gibraltar. Another midshipman cruise to Europe followed in 1924, which lasted for the next year and went to the west coast of the United States. On June 30th, 1925, she stopped off in Santa Barbara, California, to actually assist in the aftermath of the 1925 earthquake. She was sent detachments ashore to help the police in Santa Barbara, and they established a temporary radio station in the city. After returning from her 1925 cruise, she'd be modernized at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. She had her 12 old coal-fired boilers replaced with 4 oil-fired models, which would be trunked into a larger single funnel. She had more deck armor added to protect her from plunging fire, and a short tripod mast was installed in place of her aft cage mast. Her modernization would be complete on November 1926, after which she conducted a shakedown cruise in the Atlantic, and then returned to Philadelphia, where she ran acceptance trials before she could rejoin the fleet. On September 5th, 1927, she was present for ceremonies unveiling a memorial tablet that was honoring French soldiers and sailors who died during the Yorktown campaign in 1781. She would return to her general training exercises in May of 1928, when she took another crew of midshipmen into the Atlantic along the East Coast, as well as for a trip down to Cuba. In June, she would participate in a joint Army-Navy coast defense exercise, and actually served as the hostile attacking fleet during these war games. In early 1929, Arkansas cruised in the Caribbean and near the Canal Zone. She'd returned to the United States in May of 1929 for another overhaul in the New York Navy Yard. After that, she was training some more, because that's just what she did. A lot. Do you even lift like Arkansas? And after that, she'd operate with the scouting fleet off the East Coast. In February of 1931, she participated in Fleet Problem 12, and during those maneuvers, she served as Admiral Arthur L. Willard's flagship, and she was sunk by a submarine. Not really, but as part of the games, she lost. And a month later, she'd actually participate in some exercises with the carriers, Lexington and Saratoga. Then she participated in the Yorktown sesquicentennial celebrations in October of 1931, marking the 150th anniversary of the Siege of Yorktown. She embarked President Herbert Hoover and his entourage on October 17th and took them to the exposition, as well as taking them back to Annapolis on the 19th and 20th of October. After this, she went into dry dock again for another refit in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, which lasted until January of 1932. When she was done, she was transferred back to the Pacific, though by late 1934, she'd be back in the Atlantic again. She's just all over the place. It doesn't matter. They're just whatever. Another major overhaul would happen in the spring of 1936, and after that did more midshipman cruises. But after World War II broke out in September of 1939, Arkansas was moored at Hampton Roads, preparing to depart on another training cruise for the Naval Reserve. She departed to transport a seaplane mooring and aviation equipment from Norfolk to Narragansett Bay, where the Navy planned to set up a seaplane base. While in Newport, Arkansas picked up ordnance for destroyers and brought it back to Hampton Roads. After she returned to Virginia, she was assigned to a reserve force for the neutrality patrols in the Atlantic, alongside her sister, Wyoming, as well as her cousins, New York and Texas. They also had the carrier, Ranger, alongside them. On January 11th, 1940, Arkansas, alongside New York and Texas, would leave for fleet maneuvers off of Cuba. She underwent another overhaul between March 18th and May 24th. After that, she conducted another midship training cruise, along again with Texas and New York. They're all hanging out. And they went to Panama and Venezuela. In late 1940, she conducted 3 Naval Reserve training cruises, also in the Atlantic. Very late that year, December 19th, 1940, with 500 reservists on board, she actually had a bit of an accident. At 300 hours, Arkansas would collide with another ship, Collier Melrose, of the Mystic Steamship Company of Boston, off of Seagirt, New Jersey. It wasn't a severe impact. Arkansas was actually completely fine, just some scratched paint and a smashed lifeboat. But the Collier Melrose was not so lucky. Her below-water plates had been cracked, and she sank just short of a Brooklyn dry dock, after she steamed 40 miles to try to make it back to port. A sad situation for her, but there were more pressing matters at the time. Arkansas was assigned to the escort force for the Marines deployed to occupy Iceland in July of 1941, alongside New York, 2 cruisers and 11 destroyers. The task force deployed from NS Argentia, Newfoundland on July 1st, and they were back in port by July 19th. Starting on August 7th, Arkansas went on further neutrality patrols in the mid-Atlantic that would last a week. After she returned to port, she traveled to the Atlantic Charter Conference with President Roosevelt and the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, which took place on board HMS Prince of Wales. While there, the U.S. Undersecretary of State, Sumner Welles, decided to stay aboard Arkansas. She would conduct yet another neutrality patrol between the 2nd and 11th of September. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and caused the United States to enter World War II, Arkansas was anchored in Casco Bay, Maine. Just a week after that happened, she would be sent back to Iceland, and then head to Boston on January 24th, 1942. She would start conducting training maneuvers to prepare her crew for the war ahead. At the time, they were focusing on convoy escort duties. On March 6th, she'd arrive in Norfolk to begin another overhaul. Her secondary battery would be reduced to 6 5-inch guns, and she'd be given 36 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns in quad mounts, and 26 20mm Oerlikon anti-aircraft guns were added. Her complement of 3-inch guns was increased from 8 to 10, and the work lasted till July 2nd, after which she conducted a shakedown cruise in the Chesapeake Bay, and then proceed to New York, arriving on July 27th. There, she would become the flagship of Task Force 38, which was to escort a convoy of 12 transports that were bound for Scotland. The convoy arrived in Greenock on August 17th, and Arkansas headed back to New York on September 4th, where she almost immediately took yet another convoy across the Atlantic to Scotland, being back in New York by October 20th. But thereafter, convoys were actually sent to North Africa to support the invasion. Arkansas would cover her first convoy that was heading down there, alongside 8 destroyers on November 3rd. When she returned to New York by the middle of September, she went into dock for another overhaul. On January 2nd, 1943, she headed back out to conduct gunnery training in the Chesapeake Bay. She was back in New York by January 30th, to prepare to return to convoy escort duty. She'd escort 2 convoys to Casablanca between February and April, before she returned to New York, where she was back in dry dock again, which lasted until May 26. She then returned to her duty as a training ship for midshipmen based at Norfolk. After 4 months of that, she was sent back for convoy escort, and on October 8th she steamed to Bangor, Northern Ireland. She remained there through November, departing on December 1st, bound for New York yet again. When she got there, she headed back into dock for even more repairs, and then returned to Norfolk on December 27th. She escorted another convoy bound for Ireland on January 19th, 1944, before heading back to New York again. She's in New York a lot. The beginning of spring saw her doing another round of gunnery drills, after which she went to Boston for more dry dock work. On April 18th, she departed for Northern Ireland, where she started training for a new task: shore bombardment. She had been assigned to the shore bombardment force for Operation Overlord, which was the invasion of northern France. She was assigned to Group 2, alongside Texas and 5 destroyers. Her floatplane artillery observer pilots were actually temporarily assigned to Voss 7, flying Spitfires from RNAS Leon Solent, or HMS Daedalus. On June 3rd, she left her moorings, and on the morning of June 6th took up a position about 4,000 yards from Omaha Beach. At 5:52, she opened fire and bombarded German positions around Omaha Beach for 10 days, until June 13th, when she was moved to support ground forces in Grand Camp Lebanes. On June 25th, she bombarded Cherbourg in support of an American attack on the port. German coastal guns actually straddled her several times, but never managed to actually hit Cherbourg fell to the Allies the following day, after which Arkansas would return to port, first in Weymouth, England, and then to Bangor, Northern Ireland on June 30th. On July 4th, Independence Day, America, she departed Northern Ireland for the Mediterranean Sea, and she'd reached Oran, Algeria on July 10th, before proceeding on to Toronto, arriving on July 21st. There she joined the support force for Operation Dragoon, which was the invasion of southern France. Again, she would bombard the shore heavily, beginning on August 15th. The bombardment lasted for 2 days, after which she'd withdraw, first to Palermo and then to Oran. After this, she actually headed back to the United States, arriving in Boston on September 14th, where she underwent yet another refit that lasted till early November. Then it was decided to send her over to the Pacific. She steamed to California via the Panama Canal and spent the rest of the year conducting training there. On January 20th, 1945, she left California to Pearl Harbor, then to Ulithi, to join the fleet in preparations for the amphibious assault on Iwo Jima. She was assigned to Task Force 54, which included 5 other battleships, 4 cruisers, and 16 destroyers. On February 16th, Arkansas was in position off of Iwo Jima, and at 600 hours, she opened fire on Japanese positions on the island's west coast. The bombardment would last for 3 days, though she would remain off the island throughout the entire battle, ready to provide fire support to the Marines when requested. She would finally leave on March 7th, bound for Ulithi, and arrive on March 10th, where she was rearmed and refueled in preparation for the invasion of Okinawa. She left Ulithi on March 21st and arrived off of Okinawa 4 days after that, when she then began that bombardment, along with the rest of Task Force 54. The soldiers and Marines went ashore on April 1st, and Arkansas continued to provide support to them over the course of 46 days throughout the Battle of Okinawa. Kamikazes repeatedly attacked her, but never managed to hit. She would leave the island in May, arriving in Guam on May 14th. She then proceeded to Leyte Gulf on June 12th, arriving 4 days later. There she'd be assigned to Task Group 95.7, alongside Texas and 3 cruisers. She remained in the Philippines until August 20th, when she departed for Okinawa, arriving in Buckner Bay on August 23rd. By that time, Japan had surrendered, and the war was over. During the course of it, Arkansas personally was awarded 4 battle stars. Work wasn't quite over for Arkansas, though. She would participate in Operation Magic Carpet, the repatriation of American servicemen from the Pacific. She took around 800 servicemen back home to the United States, departing on September 23rd and reaching Seattle, Washington on October 15th. She actually made another 3 Magic Carpet trips between Pearl Harbor and the continental United States to ferry more soldiers home. And during the first months of 1946, Arkansas was sitting in San Francisco. She was an old battleship, an old-style dreadnought, and unfortunately, dreadnoughts in particular were starting to be seen as obsolete. The Navy was also looking to downsize, and it was decided that Arkansas would be one of many ships utilized for Operation Crossroads, the atomic bomb tests conducted at Bikini Atoll. In late April, she got underway to Hawaii and reached Pearl Harbor on May 8th. She left it on May 20th and headed to Bikini Atoll. Now, we've talked about some other battleships that were a part of these particular atomic bomb tests. Nevada, Pennsylvania, and New York were all there too, and they survived both blasts. But Arkansas wasn't so fortunate. On July 1st, the first test, Able, which was an airburst, didn't actually manage to sink her, but did do extensive shock damage to her upper workings, and on July 25th, she was finally sunk by the underwater nuclear test, Baker. And you might think this would reflect badly on the Wyoming class as a whole, but in Arkansas's defense, she was only 250 yards from the epicenter of the blast, and she was described as appearing to have been crushed as if by a tremendous hammer blow from below. It's believed that a wave of water from the blast capsized her, and then she was hammered down into the shallow bottom by the descent of the water column thrown up by the blast. Her wreck lies inverted in only about 180 feet of water in the bottom of Bikini Lagoon, where she now acts as an artificial reef. She was struck from the naval vessel Register on August 15th of 1946. And interestingly, one of the best preserved elements of USS Arkansas, besides her wreck, is actually the Arkansas state flag. Yes, really, the ship was the catalyst for the creation of the flag. Back in 1912, the Daughters of the American Revolution, or DAR, decided that they wanted to present 3 flags to the battleship as she was nearing her commission date. The 3 flags they chose were the American flag, the Navy Battalion Ensign, and a state flag. But when the DAR learned that at the time that Arkansas didn't actually have an official state flag, they decided to hold a statewide competition to come up with one. The winning design was from Willie Cavanaugh Hawker of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, who was also a member of the DAR. And on February 26, 1913, with a few alterations, Hawker's design became the official flag of Arkansas and was thereafter presented to the battleship that bore the state's name. Though her end is unceremonious, she served faithfully for a long time. I find that USS Arkansas often isn't brought up much in conversation, perhaps because she didn't have that many epic escapades, but she still served faithfully and deserves to be remembered. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Brian, Jack Carson's Row Videos, Lord 444, Mark Holding, Murder Drones Doll, 8person723, Row Hudson 2860, Isurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redlion, Edis Production 8104, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Ohio Trucker 1, Andrew Bowen, Josh Johnson, Hayden DeGrow, Caleb Brainwaters, Prez Trenton, Master of None, Arizona Hot Rail, Liam Wright, Mr. Sleepy, Travis Dolinsky, Jared Brussel, Dr. Racer 78, Joshua Long, Hannah Bird, and Amtrak 2024 Productions. Till next time, this is Darkness, individual of fun. Farewell.